Daniel never imagined that a simple walk home from work would turn into a life-changing encounter that would stir up emotions he thought he had buried forever. As he trudged through the cold evening, lost in the shadows of his grief, he stumbled upon something that stopped him in his tracks. A small child left alone in a cardboard box, shivering and abandoned. With every heartbeat, memories of his own shattered dreams and the family he lost came rushing back. But this time, something was different. Something about that child's gaze tugged at the deepest parts of his soul, awakening a spark of hope he thought he'd never feel again. Daniel had promised himself he would never let anyone in again, that he would protect his heart from more pain. But as he held that tiny, fragile life in his arms, he felt a shift, a determination to fight against the odds for this innocent soul. What secret would this small child unravel in Daniel's broken heart? And how far would he go to ensure she'd never feel abandoned again? Stay tuned as we follow Daniel's emotional journey of love, loss, and redemption. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe for more. The frosty air bit at Sarah's cheeks as she stumbled down the deserted sidewalk, her arms wrapped tightly around a cardboard box. The streetlights cast long shadows, their dim glow barely penetrating the darkness that seemed to mirror the turmoil in her heart. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if her body was fighting against the decision her mind had painfully made. Inside the box, nestled in a worn blanket, lay her daughter, Emily. The child's peaceful slumber was a stark contrast to the storm raging within Sarah. At just 1 year old, Emily was blissfully unaware of the heartbreak unfolding around her. Sarah's trembling fingers grasped the edge of the box as she lowered it gently onto the cold concrete. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I love you more than anything in this world, but that's why I have to do this." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she tucked a folded note into Emily's blanket. The words she had agonized over for days now felt woefully inadequate. "Please love her like I couldn't. Give her a better life." As Sarah stood up, her legs nearly gave way beneath her. She forced herself to take one step back, then another, her eyes never leaving the box containing her whole world. "Be safe, my little angel," she murmured, before turning and fleeing into the night, her sobs echoing in the empty street. The scene faded, giving way to memories of a different time, a time before addiction had sunk its cruel claws into Sarah's life. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been a bright-eyed college student with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her infectious laugh and kind heart made her popular among her peers. "You're going to change the world someday, Sarah," her mother would often say, beaming with pride. But everything changed when Sarah met Jake at a party during her sophomore year. His charm and free-spirited nature drew her in like a moth to a flame. "Live a little, babe," he'd say with a wink, offering her a pill or a drink. "Life's too short to play it safe." At first, it was just harmless fun, or so Sarah thought. Weekend parties turned into weekday binges. Classes were skipped, grades slipped, and her once promising future began to crumble. "Sarah, honey, we're worried about you," her father said during a tense family dinner. "This isn't like you." "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on, Dad," Sarah snapped, pushing away her barely touched plate. "I'm fine. Just leave me alone." She stormed out that night, seeking solace in Jake's arms and the numbing embrace of the drugs he always seemed to have on hand. It wasn't long before Sarah dropped out of college entirely, much to her parents' dismay. "You're throwing your life away," her mother cried. "Can't you see what's happening to you?" But Sarah was too far gone to listen. The world of addiction had become her new reality, a hazy existence where nothing mattered except the next high. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah sat on the bathroom floor, staring in disbelief at the positive pregnancy test in her shaking hands. "Jake," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, I'm pregnant." His reaction was not what she had hoped for. "Get rid of it," he said coldly, not even looking up from his phone. "We can't afford a kid, and I'm not ready to be tied down." But something stirred in Sarah's heart, a flicker of the person she used to be. "No," she said firmly. "I'm keeping this baby." Jake left that night and never came back. Sarah found herself alone, pregnant, and still battling the demons of addiction. She tried to get clean, she really did. For a few months, she managed to stay sober, attending support groups and reconnecting with her worried parents. Emily came into the world on a crisp autumn morning, her cries filling the hospital room with new life and hope. As Sarah held her daughter for the first time, she made a silent promise. "I'll do better for you, my sweet girl. I'll be the mother you deserve." For a while, it seemed like Sarah might keep that promise. She moved back in with her parents, who doted on their granddaughter. Sarah even started looking into programs to finish her degree. But the call of addiction is a siren song, impossible to ignore once it's taken hold. It started small, just one pill to take the edge off the stress of motherhood. Then another, and another. Before long, Sarah was spiraling again. She'd leave Emily with her parents for days at a time, returning strung out and full of hollow apologies. "I'm trying," she'd sob as her mother rocked a fussy Emily. "I swear I'm trying." The final straw came when Sarah met Danny. He was bad news from the start, a dealer with connections to some truly dangerous people. But he had an endless supply of the drugs Sarah craved, and that was all that mattered to her addled mind. One night, high out of her mind, Sarah brought Danny back to her parents' house. The argument that ensued was explosive. "You bring that lowlife into our home? Around our granddaughter," her father roared. "That's it, Sarah. We've tried to help you, but we can't stand by and watch you destroy yourself and endanger Emily." "Fine," Sarah screamed back. "We don't need you. Come on, Emily, we're leaving." She scooped up her confused, crying daughter and stormed out into the night. It was the last time her parents would see either of them for months. Life with Danny was a nightmare. Their rundown apartment was a revolving door of addicts and criminals. Sarah tried to shield Emily from the worst of it, but she knew in her heart that this was no place for a child. The breaking point came when Sarah woke up one morning to find Danny unconscious on the floor, a needle still in his arm. Emily was crying in her playpen, her diaper soaked and her face streaked with tears. As Sarah looked at her daughter's frightened face, something inside her shattered. This beautiful, innocent child deserved so much better than the life Sarah could give her. With Danny passed out and unlikely to wake anytime soon, Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She packed a small bag with Emily's favorite toys and some clean clothes. Then, fighting back tears, she wrote the note that would change both their lives forever. The memory faded, bringing Sarah back to the present moment. She stood at the end of the street, looking back at the box containing her daughter. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to go back, to scoop Emily up and never let her go. But Sarah knew she had to be strong enough to give Emily her best chance at life, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. "I love you, Emily," Sarah whispered into the cold night air. "I hope someday you'll understand why I did this, and I hope you'll forgive me." With one last, longing look, Sarah turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. The street fell silent once more, save for the gentle rustling of a blanket as little Emily stirred in her sleep, unaware that her life was about to change forever. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, the quiet neighborhood slowly came to life. Early risers emerged from their homes, bundled up against the morning chill as they set off for work or their daily routines. None of them noticed the small cardboard box on the sidewalk or the precious cargo it contained. Emily slept on, her tiny fist clutching the edge of her blanket, the note from her mother tucked safely beside her. The world continued to spin, oblivious to the heartrending sacrifice that had taken place in the dark of night. But for Sarah and Emily, everything had changed. Their paths had diverged, leading them into an uncertain future filled with both sorrow and hope. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm rays finally reached the cardboard box. Emily began to stir, her eyes fluttering open to a world that was suddenly much bigger and more frightening than she had ever known. Her soft whimpers grew into full-fledged cries, a plaintive call for a mother who was no longer there. The sound echoed down the empty street, a haunting reminder of the love and loss that had brought her to this moment. Little did Emily know that her cries would soon be answered, not by the mother who had left her, but by someone else, someone whose own heart had been shattered by loss and was desperately in need of healing. The stage was set for a story of unexpected connection, of two broken souls finding solace and redemption in each other. As Emily's cries pierced the morning air, fate was already weaving its intricate tapestry, bringing together two lives in a way that neither could have imagined. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the sidewalk and illuminating the small box that held not just a child, but a future full of possibilities. Emily's story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, its deep, resonant tones echoing through the quiet house. In the darkened bedroom upstairs, Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open to stare blankly at the ceiling. Another sleepless night, another day to face. At 17, Daniel should have been full of life, dreams, and ambition. Instead, he felt like a ghost, haunting the rooms of his grandmother's house, barely more substantial than the memories that tormented him. With a heavy sigh, he swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet touching the cold wooden floor. The chill sent a shiver up his spine, but it was nothing compared to the constant ache in his heart. "Daniel?" His grandmother's voice, soft and concerned, came from the other side of the door. "You awake, baby?" "Yeah, Miss Lila," he responded, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I'm up." The door creaked open, and Miss Lila's kind face appeared. Her eyes, wise with years of both joy and sorrow, took in the sight of her grandson. Daniel's tall frame was hunched, his dark skin ashen, and his usually bright eyes dull with pain. "I made some breakfast," she said gently. "Why don't you come down and have a bite?" Daniel nodded, not meeting her gaze. "I'll be down in a minute." As Miss Lila's footsteps retreated down the stairs, Daniel forced himself to stand. His eyes fell on the framed photo on his nightstand, a picture of him and Aisha, taken just months ago at their high school prom. They were smiling, full of hope and love, with no idea of the tragedy that lay ahead. Daniel picked up the frame, his thumb tracing Aisha's radiant smile. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Memories flooded his mind, as vivid and painful as the day they happened. It was a warm spring afternoon when Aisha had called him, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "Daniel, I need you to come over. Now." He'd rushed to her house, his heart pounding with worry. When she'd opened the door, her eyes were red from crying, but there was a small, nervous smile on her face. "What's wrong?" he'd asked, pulling her into a hug. Aisha had taken a deep breath, then looked up at him. "I'm pregnant." The world had seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Daniel, barely 17, had felt a rush of emotions, shock, fear, and underneath it all, a spark of joy he couldn't quite explain. Are you sure?" he'd stammered. Aisha had nodded, biting her lip. "I took 3 tests. They're all positive." They'd spent hours talking that day, weighing their options, crying, and eventually making a decision that would change their lives forever. "We can do this," Daniel had said, holding Aisha's hands tightly in his own. "It won't be easy, but we'll figure it out together. I love you, Aisha. I love you and our baby." Aisha's smile had been watery, but full of love. "I love you too, Daniel. We're going to be a family." The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparations, doctor's appointments, and hushed conversations about their future. Their parents had been shocked at first, but seeing the determination and love between Daniel and Aisha, they'd rallied around the young couple. Daniel had thrown himself into preparing for fatherhood. He'd picked up extra shifts at his after-school job, started researching colleges with daycare programs, and spent hours poring over parenting books. "You're going to be an amazing dad," Aisha had told him one night as they lay in her bed, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "And you're already an amazing mom," he'd replied, kissing her softly. They'd been so full of hope, so ready to take on the world together. The sound of a car backfiring outside jolted Daniel back to the present. He set the photo down, his hands shaking. The memories of those happy times made the pain of what followed even more unbearable. Forcing himself to move, Daniel made his way downstairs, the smell of Miss Lila's cooking filling the air. As he entered the kitchen, he saw his grandmother at the stove, humming softly to herself as she flipped pancakes. "There's my boy," Miss Lila said warmly, turning to face him. "Sit down now. You need to eat something." Daniel slid into a chair at the kitchen table, watching as Miss Lila bustled around, filling a plate with pancakes, eggs, and bacon. She set it in front of him, along with a glass of orange juice. "Thanks, Miss Lila," he murmured, picking up his fork. Miss Lila sat across from him, her own plate considerably less full. She watched him with worried eyes as he pushed the food around his plate, taking only the smallest of bites. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "I was thinking, maybe it might do you some good to talk to someone. A professional. I mean..." Daniel's fork clattered against the plate. "I don't need to talk to anyone," he said, his voice tight. "I'm fine." Miss Lila reached across the table, her weathered hand covering his. "Baby, you're not fine. And that's okay. What you've been through, no one expects you to be fine." Daniel pulled his hand away, standing up abruptly. "I said I'm fine," he repeated, his voice rising. I need to be alone." Without waiting for a response, he turned and fled the kitchen, leaving his barely touched breakfast behind. Miss Lila watched him go, her heart breaking for the grandson she loved so dearly but didn't know how to help. Daniel found himself in the living room, his eyes drawn to the stairs leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was a room he hadn't entered in months, a room full of dreams that would never come true. Against his will, his feet carried him up the stairs. He paused outside the closed door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, he turned it, pushing the door open with a soft creak. The nursery lay before him, frozen in time, soft yellow walls, cheerful animal decals, and a white crib that had never held a baby. Daniel's eyes fell on the rocking chair in the corner, where he'd imagined himself sitting with his child, singing lullabies in the quiet hours of the night. A mobile hung over the crib, its little stuffed animal swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing against a tiny giraffe. The touch sent him reeling back into memories he'd tried so hard to forget. The day had started with such joy. Aisha, 9 months pregnant and glowing, had woken him. "It's time," she'd said, her voice a mix of nervousness and anticipation. They'd rushed to the hospital, full of excitement for the new life they were about to bring into the world. But as the hours ticked by, that excitement had turned to worry, then to fear. "There are some complications," the doctor had explained, his face grave. "We need to perform an emergency C-section." Daniel had held Aisha's hand as they wheeled her into the operating room, promising her that everything would be okay. It was a promise he couldn't keep. The next few hours were a blur of alarms, shouted medical terms he didn't understand, and a growing sense of helplessness. And then, in the span of a few devastating moments, he'd lost everything. "I'm sorry," the doctor had said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "We did everything we could, but we couldn't save either of them." Daniel's world had shattered. In an instant, his dreams of a future with Aisha and their child had been ripped away. He'd collapsed in the hospital hallway, his anguished cries echoing off the sterile walls. The days that followed were a haze of grief. The funeral, the well-meaning but empty words of consolation, the pitying looks from friends and strangers alike. It all blurred together in a fog of pain. And now, months later, Daniel still felt trapped in that fog. He went through the motions of living, attending school, helping Miss Lila around the house, but inside, he felt hollow. A soft knock at the nursery door pulled Daniel from his memories. He turned to see Miss Lila standing in the doorway, her eyes full of understanding. "I miss them too, baby," she said softly. "Every single day." Daniel felt the walls he'd built around his grief begin to crumble. "I failed them, Miss Lila," he choked out. "I was supposed to protect them, to take care of them, and I couldn't do anything." Miss Lila crossed the room, wrapping her arms around her grandson. Daniel, who had held himself rigid for so long, finally let go. He sobbed into his grandmother's shoulder, releasing months of pent-up anguish. "You listen to me, Daniel," Miss Lila said firmly, holding him tight. "What happened wasn't your fault. Sometimes life is cruel, and things happen that we can't control. But you did not fail Aisha or your baby. You loved them with everything you had." Daniel pulled back, wiping his eyes. "But what do I do now?" he asked, his voice small and lost. "How do I keep going when everything I wanted is gone?" Miss Lila cupped his face in her hands, looking into his eyes with fierce love. "You keep their memory alive," she said. "You live the life they would have wanted for you. It won't be easy, and the pain won't ever go away completely. But you're strong, Daniel. You come from a long line of survivors. She took his hand, leading him to the rocking chair. As they sat together, Miss Lila continued, "When your parents died, I thought my world had ended. But then I looked at you, this beautiful little boy who needed me, and I knew I had to keep going. You gave me purpose, Daniel. And someday, when you're ready, you'll find your purpose again, too." Daniel leaned his head on his grandmother's shoulder, feeling, for the first time in months, a tiny flicker of hope. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You can," Miss Lila assured him. "And you will. But you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, always. And maybe it's time to let others help too. What do you say we look into that counseling, After a long moment, Daniel nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll try." Little did Daniel know that fate had plans for him. Plans that would challenge him, heal him, and give him a chance at the love and family he thought he'd lost forever. As he and Miss Lila made their way downstairs to finish their breakfast, the universe was already setting in motion events that would change Daniel's life in ways he could never have imagined. The nursery door closed softly behind them, but it was no longer a room to be avoided. Instead, it stood as a testament to love that had been, and to the possibility of love that was yet to come. The evening air was crisp as Daniel trudged home from his shift at Rosie's Diner. His footsteps echoed in the quiet neighborhood, matching the dull rhythm of his thoughts. Another day gone, another night to face. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, more out of habit than against the cold he barely felt anymore. As he rounded the corner onto his street, something caught his eye. A small cardboard box sat on the sidewalk, illuminated by the flickering streetlight above. Daniel might have walked right past it, lost in his own world of grief, but then he saw it move. Just slightly, but enough to make him pause. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure whether to investigate or keep walking. Then, carried on the gentle breeze, he heard it, a soft, muffled cry. Daniel's heart, which had felt like a cold, dead weight in his chest for so long, suddenly skipped a beat. Without conscious thought, his feet carried him toward the box. As he got closer, the cries became clearer, the unmistakable sound of a baby in distress. "Hello," Daniel called softly, kneeling beside the box. "Is someone there?" The only response was another whimper. With trembling hands, Daniel reached out and carefully opened the top of the box. What he saw inside made his breath catch in his throat. A little girl, no more than a year old, lay bundled in a worn blanket. Her big, teary eyes looked up at him, filled with a mixture of fear and hope that tugged at Daniel's heart in a way he hadn't felt since Aisha. "Hey there, little one," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The child's lip quivered, and she reached out a tiny hand toward him. Daniel felt something stir inside him, a warmth he'd thought was gone forever. Without hesitation, he scooped the baby into his arms, cradling her against his chest. As he adjusted the blanket around her, a folded piece of paper fell to the ground. Daniel picked it up, his heart heavy with the realization of what it must be. With one arm securely holding the child, he unfolded the note and read, "Please love her like I couldn't. Give her a better life." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He looked down at the little girl, who had nestled against him, her cries softening to gentle hiccups. In that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "It's okay," he murmured, gently rocking her. "I've got you now. You're safe." With renewed purpose, Daniel began the short walk home, his mind racing. What would Miss Lila say? How could he explain this? But underneath the worry was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months, hope. As he approached the house, Daniel saw the warm glow of the living room lights spilling onto the porch. Miss Lila would be up, probably watching her favorite late-night talk shows. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "Miss Lila," he called as he opened the front door. "I'm home, and, well, there's something you need to see." "In here, baby," Miss Lila's voice came from the living room. "How was work? Did you eat anything at the diner? You know you need to keep your strength up." Her voice trailed off as Daniel entered the room, the baby still held securely in his arms. Miss Lila's eyes widened, her mouth falling open in shock. "Daniel," she said slowly, setting down her cup of tea. What's going on? Whose child is that? Daniel took a deep breath. I found her, Miss Lila. On the street in a box. Someone left her there. Miss Lila stood up, moving closer to inspect the child. Her face was a mixture of concern and disbelief. Left her? In a box? Oh, Lord have mercy. There was a note, Daniel explained, shifting the baby to one arm so he could pull out the folded paper. He handed it to Miss Lila, watching as she read the heartbreaking message. Miss Lila's expression softened as she looked at the child, who had fallen asleep in Daniel's arms. Poor little thing, she murmured. Then, seeming to shake herself, she fixed Daniel with a stern look. We need to call the police, right now. They'll know what to do, how to find her family. But Daniel felt a surge of panic at the thought. No, he said, perhaps too forcefully. The baby stirred in his arms, and he lowered his voice. I mean, not yet. Please, Miss Lila, can we just keep her here tonight? It's late, and she's been through so much already. Miss Lila's brow furrowed. Daniel, honey, I know you mean well, but we can't just keep a child that isn't ours. There are laws, procedures. I know, Daniel interrupted. But just for tonight, please. We can call first thing in the morning, I promise. But right now, she needs somewhere safe and warm to sleep. Miss Lila studied her grandson's face, seeing something there she hadn't seen in months, a spark of life in his eyes. It both warmed her heart and filled her with trepidation. All right, she said finally. One night, but first thing tomorrow, we're calling the authorities. Daniel nodded, relief flooding through him. Thank you, Miss Lila. I'll take care of everything, I promise. As if on cue, the baby began to fuss, her little face scrunching up as she let out a cry. Daniel looked panicked for a moment, then began to gently rock her. Sure, it's okay, he murmured. You're safe now. Everything's going to be all right. Miss Lila watched, a mix of emotions playing across her face. She's probably hungry, she said after a moment. We don't have any formula, but there's some milk in the fridge. We can warm it up. See if she'll take that for now. Daniel nodded gratefully. Can you show me how? I don't really know what I'm doing. For the next hour, Daniel and Miss Lila worked together to care for the unexpected addition to their household. They warmed milk, fashioned a makeshift diaper out of a soft towel, and created a bed for the baby using a laundry basket lined with blankets. As the night wore on, Miss Lila couldn't help but notice the change in Daniel. The boy who had been a shell of himself for months was now fully engaged, his eyes bright with purpose as he tended to the baby's needs. Finally, with the child fed, changed, and sleeping peacefully in her makeshift bed, Daniel and Miss Lila sat down at the kitchen table. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. Daniel, Miss Lila began gently, I know what you're thinking, but she needs us, Miss Lila. Daniel interrupted, his voice low but intense. She needs me. I think I was meant to find her. Miss Lila sighed, reaching across the table to take her grandson's hand. Baby, I know your heart is in the right place. But this isn't like adopting a stray cat. This is a child, a human being with a family out there somewhere. A family that left her in a box on the street. Daniel replied, a hint of anger in his voice. They didn't want her. But I do. I can give her the love she deserves. And what happens when they find her real family? Miss Lila asked softly. Or when she's placed in foster care? Daniel, I'm worried about you. You've been through so much already. I don't want to see you get hurt again. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the sleeping baby. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I know you're worried, Miss Lila. But for the first time since I lost Aisha and our baby, I feel like I have a purpose again. Like maybe there's a reason I'm still here. He looked up at his grandmother, his eyes shining with unshed tears. When I held her, when she looked up at me, I felt something, Miss Lila, something I thought was gone forever. Please, just give me a chance. Give us a chance. Miss Lila felt her resolve weakening. She had watched her grandson withdraw from the world, consumed by grief and guilt. Now, in the span of a few hours, she saw a glimmer of the boy he used to be, full of love and hope. Daniel, she said slowly, even if we wanted to, we can't just keep her. There are laws, procedures. We don't know anything about her health or her background. I know, Daniel nodded. And I promise, we'll do everything by the book. We'll call child services in the morning, tell them everything. But maybe we could apply to be her foster parents? At least until they find her family. Miss Lila leaned back in her chair, studying her grandson. She saw the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw. It was a look she recognized. The same look he'd had when he told her he was going to be a father, all those months ago. After what felt like an eternity, Miss Lila let out a long sigh. All right, she said finally. We'll call child services in the morning. And if, and that's a big if, they think it's appropriate, we can look into fostering her. But Daniel, you have to promise me something. Anything, Daniel said eagerly. Promise me you'll be prepared for any outcome. That you'll understand if we can't keep her. And that no matter what happens, you'll keep moving forward. Can you do that? Daniel nodded solemnly. I promise, Miss Lila. Thank you. Thank you so much. As if on cue, a soft cry came from the laundry basket. Daniel was on his feet in an instant, moving to scoop up the baby. Miss Lila watched as he cradled her, speaking softly and rocking gently. Hey there, little one, he murmured. It's okay. I'm here. I've got you. Miss Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. She sent up a silent prayer, hoping that whatever happened next, it would bring healing rather than more heartbreak. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Daniel sat in the old rocking chair, the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. He looked down at her tiny face, marveling at how something so small could fill him with such overwhelming love. I don't know your name yet, he whispered, but I promise you this. For as long as I'm allowed to, I'll love you with everything I have. You're safe now. You're home. Miss Lila, watching from the doorway, felt a mixture of hope and fear for what the future might hold. But for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected arrival was the miracle they had both been waiting for. As the new day dawned, bringing with it uncertainty and the promise of change, one thing was clear. Life in the Watson household would never be the same again. The days following Hope's arrival brought a whirlwind of change to the Watson household. True to his word, Daniel had called child services first thing the next morning, explaining the situation. To his relief and Miss Lila's cautious optimism, they were granted temporary custody while the authorities investigated the child's background. Daniel threw himself into caring for Hope with a devotion that both warmed and worried Miss Lila's heart. She watched as her grandson, who had been a shell of himself for so long, slowly came back to life. Hope, Daniel had said softly one morning, as he cradled the little girl in his arms. That's what I want to call her. Because that's what she's given me. Miss Lila had simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As the days turned into weeks, the change in Daniel became more pronounced. The dark circles under his eyes began to fade, replaced by a spark of joy that Miss Lila hadn't seen since before the tragedy. He still had moments of sadness, of course, but they were no longer all-consuming. One sunny afternoon, Miss Lila stood in the doorway of the living room, watching Daniel play with Hope on the floor. He was making silly faces, eliciting peals of laughter from the little girl. Who's the silliest guy in the world? Daniel cooed, tickling Hope's tummy. Is it me? I think it might be me. Hope's giggles filled the room, a sound so pure and joyful that Miss Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard Daniel laugh like that, carefree and genuinely happy. Having fun, you too? Miss Lila asked, stepping into the room. Daniel looked up, his face flushed with exertion and happiness. Miss Lila, you won't believe it. Hope just said her first word. Well, sort of. I swear she said duh. Miss Lila raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at her lips. Is that right? Well, aren't you just the smartest little thing, Hope? As she watched Daniel scoop Hope up and spin her around, Miss Lila felt a familiar pang of worry. She couldn't deny the positive change in her grandson, but she also couldn't shake the fear that this happiness might be temporary. Later that night, after Hope had been put to bed, Miss Lila found Daniel in the kitchen, heating up a bottle for Hope's middle-of-the-night feeding. You know, she said gently, you don't have to do every feeding yourself. I'm happy to help. Daniel shook his head, smiling. I know, Miss Lila, but I love taking care of her. Miss Lila sat down at the kitchen table, patting the chair next to her. Come sit with me for a minute, baby. Daniel obliged, the bottle forgotten for the moment. Miss Lila took his hand in hers, her eyes searching his face. "Daniel," she began, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. The way you've stepped up to take care of Hope, it's beautiful to see." Daniel's face lit up at the praise, but Miss Lila held up a hand to stop him from speaking. "But," she continued, "I need to make sure you're prepared for what might happen. We don't know how long we'll be able to keep Hope. If they find her family, or if they decide we're not the best placement for her." Daniel's face fell, his grip on Miss Lila's hand tightening. "I know," he said softly. "I think about it every day. But Miss Lila, I can't let that fear stop me from loving her now. She needs me, and I need her." Miss Lila nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand, baby. Just be careful with your heart, okay?" Daniel leaned over and kissed his grandmother's cheek. "I will. But Miss Lila, for the first time in a long time, my heart doesn't hurt. It feels whole again." As the weeks passed, Hope became an integral part of their lives. Daniel threw himself into learning everything he could about childcare. He read parenting books voraciously, joined online forums for single fathers, and even signed up for infant CPR classes at the local community center. Miss Lila watched this transformation with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She saw how Daniel's entire demeanor had changed. He smiled more, engaged in conversation, and even started talking about future plans, something he hadn't done since losing Aisha and their baby. One evening, as Daniel was giving Hope her bath, Miss Lila overheard him talking softly to the little girl. "You know, Hope," he was saying, "I used to think my life was over, that I'd never be happy again. But you changed everything. You gave me a reason to keep going." Miss Lila felt her heart constrict. She was overjoyed to see Daniel healing, but she couldn't shake the fear that it might all come crashing down. The next morning, as Daniel was feeding Hope her breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Miss Lila went to answer it, her heart sinking when she saw who was on the other side. A woman in a crisp suit stood on their porch, a folder tucked under her arm, and a sympathetic but professional smile on her face. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Sarah Thompson from Child Protective Services. May I come in?" Miss Lila felt her blood run cold, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Of course, please come in." As they entered the kitchen, Daniel looked up from where he was wiping Hope's face. His smile faltered when he saw the stranger. "Daniel," Miss Lila said, her voice tight, "this is Ms. Thompson from CPS. She's here about Hope." Daniel stood up slowly, his arms instinctively going around Hope. Is everything okay?" Ms. Thompson's smile was gentle but firm. "Mr. Watson, Ms. Watson, I understand you've been caring for this child for the past few weeks. Can you tell me how she came into your care?" For the next hour, Daniel and Miss Lila recounted the story of how they found Hope, showed Ms. Thompson the note that had been left with her, and explained everything they had done since that night. Ms. Thompson listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. Finally, she closed her folder and looked at them both. "I want to commend you both for your actions," she began. "You did the right thing by contacting us immediately, and it's clear you've been taking excellent care of Hope." Daniel felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by Ms. Thompson's next words. "However," she continued, "the situation is irregular. We have no information about Hope's background, her medical history, or her family. Until we can conduct a thorough investigation and ensure that all legal requirements are met, we'll need to place Hope in temporary foster care." Daniel felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "No," he whispered, his arms tightening around Hope. "No, you can't take her. She belongs here, with us." Ms. Thompson's face was sympathetic but resolute. "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Watson, but it's necessary for Hope's well-being and to comply with the law. You're welcome to apply to become certified foster parents, but until then, we need to place Hope with a licensed foster family." Miss Lila put a steadying hand on Daniel's shoulder. When do you need to take her?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I have a foster family ready to take her today," Ms. Thompson replied. "It would be best if we could make the transition as soon as possible." Daniel felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. Not again. He couldn't lose someone he loved. Not again. "Please," he begged, tears forming in his eyes. "Just give us a little more time. We can get certified. We can do whatever you need us to do. Just don't take her away." Ms. Thompson shook her head gently. I'm sorry, but that's not how the process works. We need to ensure Hope's safety and well-being first. You can start the certification process immediately, and if you're approved, we can revisit Hope's placement. The next hour was a blur of activity and emotion. Daniel moved as if in a trance, helping Miss Lila gather Hope's things while Miss Thompson waited patiently. Every laugh, every coo from Hope felt like a dagger in his heart. As Miss Thompson prepared to leave with Hope, Daniel leaned in front of the little girl, who was looking at him with confusion in her big brown eyes. "Hope," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I need you to be brave, okay? You're going to go with this nice lady for a little while, but I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to bring you back home." He hugged her tightly, breathing in her sweet baby scent, trying to memorize every detail of this moment. "I love you, Hope," he whispered. "Don't forget that. I love you so much." As Miss Thompson gently took Hope from his arms, Daniel felt as if his heart was being ripped from his chest. He watched, paralyzed, as they walked down the front path to the waiting car. Just before Miss Thompson placed Hope in the car seat, the little girl looked back at the house. Her face scrunched up, and she reached out her arms towards Daniel, letting out a heart-wrenching wail. "Dada," she cried, the word clear as day this time. "Dada." Daniel surged forward, but Miss Lila's firm grip on his arm held him back. They stood on the porch, watching as the car drove away, taking Hope with it. As the car disappeared around the corner, Daniel's knees gave out. He sank to the porch steps, his body racked with sobs. Miss Lila sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her grandson. "It's not fair," Daniel choked out between sobs. "Why does everyone I love get taken away from me?" Miss Lila held him tightly, her own tears falling silently. "I know, baby," she murmured. "I know it's not fair, but this isn't the end. We're going to fight for her. You hear me? We're going to do everything we can to bring Hope back home." Daniel looked up at his grandmother, his face streaked with tears, but his eyes blazing with determination. "You're right," he said, his voice growing stronger. "This isn't over. I made a promise to Hope, and I intend to keep it. I won't stop fighting until she's back where she belongs, with us." As they sat there on the porch, the house behind them feeling emptier than it had in weeks, Daniel made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to become the person Hope needed him to be. He would jump through every hoop, clear every hurdle, and prove to the world that he was worthy of being Hope's father. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, Daniel had something to fight for. Hope had given him a second chance at love and family, and he wasn't about to let that slip away without a fight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, Daniel stood up, wiping his eyes. He turned to Miss Lila, his face set with determination. "We've got work to do," he said. "First thing tomorrow, we're going to start the process to become certified foster parents. And we're not going to stop until Hope is back home with us." Miss Lila nodded, a small, proud smile on her face. "That's my boy," she said softly. "We'll do this together, Daniel. For Hope." As they walked back into the house, the absence of Hope's laughter and babbling was painfully apparent. But amidst the heartache, there was a flicker of something else, a determination, a purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. The healing process that had begun with Hope's arrival had been interrupted, but it wasn't over. In fact, Daniel realized it was just beginning. This fight for Hope would be the hardest thing he'd ever done, but it would also be the most important. As he looked around the nursery, now quiet and still, Daniel whispered a promise into the empty room. "I'm coming for you, Hope. Just hold on. Your dad is coming." The days following Hope's removal were the darkest Daniel had experienced since losing Aisha and their unborn child. But unlike before, when grief had paralyzed him, this time Daniel felt a fierce determination burning within him. He couldn't lose Hope the way he'd lost his first family. This time, he would fight with everything he had. "Miss Lila," Daniel said one morning, his voice firm with resolve, "I'm going to get a second job. We need to save up for the legal fees and to make sure we can provide for Hope when she comes home." Miss Lila looked at her grandson with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure, baby? You're already working so hard." Daniel nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Hope needs me, and I'm not going to let her down." True to his word, Daniel secured a second job at a local warehouse, working nights after his shifts at Rosie's Diner. His days became a blur of work, study, and preparation. In the few hours he had free, Daniel pored over parenting books and legal documents, determined to prove he was fit to be Hope's father. Every Thursday, without fail, Daniel visited Hope at her foster home. The visits were both joyful and heartbreaking. Hope's face would light up when she saw him, her little arms reaching out as she babbled, "Dada." During one visit, as Daniel held Hope close, he whispered, "I promise you, little one, I'm going to bring you home. No matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is, I'll never stop fighting for you." Miss Lila, who had once feared Daniel's attachment to Hope, now found herself fully invested in their fight to bring her home. She saw the change in her grandson, the purpose in his eyes, the determination in his stride. The boy she had raised was coming back to life. One evening, as Daniel sat at the kitchen table surrounded by study materials, Miss Lila placed a steaming mug of coffee beside him. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the books and papers. Daniel looked up, fatigue evident in his eyes, but a smile on his face. "I'm studying for my GED, Miss Lila. I need to finish my education if I want to give Hope the best life possible." Miss Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. "Oh, Daniel," she said softly, "I am so proud of you." As weeks turned into months, Daniel's transformation began to catch the attention of the community. At Rosie's Diner, customers would ask about his progress, offering words of encouragement and support. Even Daniel's social worker, Ms. Thompson, couldn't help but be impressed by his dedication. During one of her check-ins, she remarked, "Daniel, I have to say, your commitment to Hope is truly remarkable. It's not often we see this level of dedication, especially from someone who isn't biologically related to the child." Daniel's response was simple but heartfelt. "Biology doesn't make a family, Ms. Thompson. Love does. And I love Hope more than anything in this world." Word of Daniel's fight for Hope spread through the community like wildfire. People were moved by the story of the young man who had lost so much, but was willing to give everything for a child who wasn't biologically his. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel was surprised to find a crowd gathered outside Miss Lila's house when he returned from work. At the front stood Pastor Johnson from the local church, a man Daniel hadn't spoken to since Aisha's funeral. "Daniel," Pastor Johnson said, stepping forward, "we've all heard about your fight to bring Hope home. We want you to know that you're not in this alone. This community stands with you." Overwhelmed, Daniel could only nod, tears welling up in his eyes. The support came in various forms. Church members organized a fundraiser to help with legal fees. Local businesses offered Daniel flexible hours so he could attend parenting classes and court hearings. Even Daniel's old high school teachers came forward, offering to tutor him for his GED exam. Miss Lila watched all of this with a mixture of pride and amazement. One evening, as Daniel sat on the porch after a long day, she joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "when you first brought Hope home, I was terrified. I thought you were setting yourself up for more heartbreak. But now I see that little girl was exactly what you needed." Daniel looked at his grandmother, a small smile playing on his lips. "She saved me, Miss Lila, and now it's my turn to save her." The fight was long and exhausting. There were setbacks and disappointments. Days when the legal jargon seemed impenetrable, when the system felt stacked against them. But through it all, Daniel never wavered in his determination. During one particularly difficult court hearing, the opposing lawyer questioned Daniel's ability to care for Hope. "Mr. Watson," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're a high school dropout working 2 minimum wage jobs. How can you possibly provide a stable home for this child?" Daniel stood tall, his voice steady as he responded, "I may not have much, sir, but I have love. I have a community that supports me. And I have a promise I made to that little girl, a promise I intend to keep. I will work tirelessly. I will sacrifice everything to give Hope the life she deserves." His words resonated not just with the judge, but with everyone in the courtroom. Even Ms. Thompson, seated at the opposite table, couldn't help but nod in approval. As the months passed, Daniel's hard work began to pay off. He earned his GED, scoring higher than anyone expected. The diner promoted him to assistant manager, recognizing his dedication and improved skills. And with every visit, His bond with Hope grew stronger. During one visit, as Hope played with a stuffed animal Daniel had brought her, her foster mother pulled him aside. "You know," she said quietly, "Hope talks about you all the time. Even when you're not here, she'll point at your picture and say, Dada. I've never seen anything like it." Daniel felt his heart swell with love and longing. "She's my world," he said simply. "I won't stop until she's home with me." The turning point came on a crisp autumn day, almost a year after Hope had first entered Daniel's life. Miss Thompson arrived at Miss Lila's house, her face unreadable. "Daniel," she said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly, "I have some news. We've completed our investigation into Hope's background. We've found no trace of her biological family, and given the circumstances of her abandonment, the court is leaning towards terminating parental rights." Daniel held his breath, hardly daring to hope. Ms. Thompson continued, a small smile forming on her face. "Given your extraordinary efforts over the past year, your unwavering commitment to Hope, and the strong community support you've garnered, we're recommending that you be allowed to adopt Hope." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Daniel stared at Ms. Thompson, barely able to comprehend her words. "You mean, Hope can come home? For good?" Ms. Thompson nodded, her smile widening. "There will still be some paperwork and a final court hearing, but yes, Daniel. If all goes well, Hope will be coming home to stay." Daniel let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Miss Lila, who had been listening from the doorway, rushed to embrace her grandson. "You did it, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You really did it." The final hearing was a formality. The judge, moved by Daniel's unwavering dedication and the outpouring of community support, gladly signed the adoption papers. As the gavel fell, sealing the decision, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Daniel stood, his heart pounding, as Ms. Thompson brought Hope to him. The little girl, now nearly 2 years old, reached out for him with a big smile. "Dada," she exclaimed happily. With tears in his eyes, Daniel scooped Hope into his arms, holding her close. "That's right, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'm your Dada, and you're finally home." As they left the courthouse, Daniel was surprised to find what seemed like the entire town waiting outside. Pastor Johnson stepped forward, a broad smile on his face. "Daniel," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "we're all here to welcome Hope home. Your love and dedication have inspired us all. You've shown us what it truly means to be a father." Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, friends, neighbors, co-workers, all there to support him and Hope. He felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. That night, as Daniel tucked Hope into her bed, in her room, in their home, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. "You know, Hope," he said softly, brushing a curl from her forehead, "a long time ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never be happy again. But then you came along, and you gave me a reason to keep going. You saved me, little one." Hope looked up at him with her big brown eyes, a sleepy smile on her face. "Love you, Dada," she murmured. Daniel felt his heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost took his breath away. "I love you too, Hope," he whispered. "More than you'll ever know." As he turned off the light and quietly left the room, Daniel paused in the doorway, looking back at his daughter. In that moment, he sent up a silent thanks to whatever force had brought Hope into his life, to the community that had supported him, and to Hope herself, for giving him a second chance at love and family. Daniel Watson, once broken by tragedy, had been rebuilt by love and determination. And as he closed Hope's door softly behind him, he knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The years seemed to fly by in a whirlwind of laughter, tears, and countless precious moments. Hope, once a tiny bundle left in a cardboard box, had blossomed into a vibrant, strong-willed teenager. At 15, she was the spitting image of the mother she'd never known, with Daniel's warm brown eyes and infectious smile. Daniel, now in his early 30s, watched his daughter grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. Every day brought new challenges and joys, each one a reminder of how far they'd come together. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced on the sidewalk outside their modest home, Daniel stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes and humming softly to himself. Hope bounded down the stairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning, Dad," she chirped, grabbing a pancake off the stack and taking a big bite. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You know, plates exist for a reason, kiddo." Hope grinned, her mouth full. "Too slow," she mumbled, reaching for another pancake. These quiet morning moments were some of Daniel's favorites. As he watched Hope devour her breakfast, he marveled at how much she'd grown. It seemed like only yesterday he was teaching her to tie her shoes, and now she was talking about college applications and driver's ed. "Hey, don't forget," Daniel said as Hope gathered her things. "We've got that parent-teacher conference this afternoon. I'll pick you up right after school." Hope's face fell slightly. "Oh, about that. I kind of made plans with Jess to go to the mall. Can we reschedule?" Daniel frowned. "Hope, we've known about this for weeks. Your teachers are expecting us." "But Dad," Hope protested, "Jess's mom is taking us to look at homecoming dresses. It's important." "So is your education," Daniel countered, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm sorry, but the mall will have to wait. We're going to that conference." Hope's eyes flashed with anger. "You never let me do anything fun. It's always school this, responsibility that. I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad." Before Daniel could respond, Hope stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Teenage years were proving to be a whole new kind of challenge. As the day wore on, Daniel couldn't shake the nagging worry about Hope. Their arguments were becoming more frequent lately, and he often felt like he was walking on eggshells. Had he done something wrong? Was he being too strict? When school let out, Daniel waited in the parking lot, his heart sinking when he saw Hope's sullen expression as she approached the car. The parent-teacher conference was tense, with Hope giving monosyllabic answers and avoiding eye contact. On the drive home, Daniel tried to break the ice. "Your teachers had great things to say about your writing, Hope. Maybe we could look into some creative writing workshops this summer." Hope stared out the window, her arms crossed. "Whatever," she muttered. Daniel felt a pang in his chest. Where was his bubbly, affectionate little girl? He missed the days when a simple hug could solve any problem. As soon as they got home, Hope disappeared into her room, the door closing with a decisive click. Daniel slumped onto the couch, feeling defeated. Maybe he'd pushed too hard about the conference. Maybe he should have let her go to the mall. Meanwhile, Hope lay on her bed, frustration and guilt warring inside her. She knew she'd been unfair to her dad, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he just didn't understand her anymore. With a sigh, she got up and quietly made her way downstairs and out the back door. A short walk brought her to a familiar little house, its porch adorned with colorful flower boxes. Hope knocked softly, and moments later, the door opened to reveal Miss Lila, her great-grandmother. "Hope, honey," Miss Lila exclaimed, her face lighting up. "What a lovely surprise. Come in, come in." Hope followed Miss Lila into the cozy living room, the scent of freshly baked cookies filling the air. As they settled onto the worn but comfortable sofa, Miss Lila studied her great-granddaughter's face. "Now, what's troubling you, child?" she asked gently. "I know that look. You've got something heavy on your heart." Hope bit her lip, fighting back tears. "It's Dad," she confessed. "We keep arguing lately. I feel like he's always on my case about school and responsibility. He doesn't understand what it's like to be a teenager. He never lets me have any fun." Miss Lila listened patiently, her wise eyes filled with understanding. When Hope finished, Miss Lila took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said softly. "There's something you need to know. A story that I think it's time you heard." Over the next hour, Miss Lila recounted the tale of how Hope came into their lives. She spoke of the cold night when Daniel found a tiny baby abandoned in a cardboard box. She described the fierce determination that had burned in Daniel's eyes as he fought to keep Hope, working multiple jobs and studying late into the night. "Your daddy sacrificed everything for you, Hope," Miss Lila explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He put his whole life on hold to give you the best chance he could. Every decision he's made, every rule he's set, has been out of love for you." Hope sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. I had no idea," she whispered. "I knew he adopted me, but all the other things he never told me." Miss Lila smiled gently. "That's your daddy. He didn't want you to feel burdened by the past. He just wanted you to have a happy, Normal life? But why? Hope asked, her voice trembling. Why did he fight so hard for me? I wasn't even his. Miss Lila cupped Hope's face in her weathered hands. Oh, child, you've always been his. From the moment he held you in his arms, you became his whole world. Blood doesn't make a family, Hope. Love does. Hope's mind raced, memories flooding back. All the times her dad had stayed up late helping her with homework, even when he was exhausted from work. The way he'd learned to braid her hair, practicing for hours so she'd have perfect plaits for picture day. How he'd taken on extra shifts to pay for her dance classes, never once complaining. I've been so selfish, Hope said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's given me everything, and I've been treating him like a typical teenager. Miss Lila finished with a gentle laugh. It's natural to push boundaries, Hope, but it's also important to remember the love behind the rules. Hope stood up abruptly, wiping her eyes. I need to go home, she said urgently. I need to talk to Dad. Miss Lila nodded, a knowing smile on her face. Go on then. And remember, honey, love is a two-way street. Your daddy needs to hear how much you love him too. Hope hugged Miss Lila tightly, then raced out the door and down the street. Her heart pounded as she burst into their house, calling out, Dad? Dad, where are you? Daniel appeared in the hallway, concern etched on his face. Hope? What's wrong? Are you okay? Without a word, Hope flung herself into her father's arms, hugging him fiercely. Daniel stumbled back a step, surprised by the sudden embrace. I'm sorry, Hope sobbed into his chest. I'm so sorry, Dad. Daniel held her close, stroking her hair. Hey, it's okay, he soothed. What's this all about? Hope pulled back, looking up at her father with tear-filled eyes. Miss Lila told me everything, she said. How you fought for me. Dad, I had no idea. Daniel's expression softened. Oh, Hope, he said gently. You didn't need to know all that. I just wanted you to have a normal life. But I didn't need to know. Hope insisted. Dad, I've been taking you for granted. I've been so caught up in my own stuff that I forgot how lucky I am to have you. She took a deep breath, her voice steadying. You've given me everything, Dad. A home, a family, a future. I promise I'm going to do better. I'm going to make you proud, just like you've always made me proud. Daniel felt his own eyes welling up with tears. Hope, sweetheart, you've always made me proud. Every single day. I love you so much, Dad, Hope said, her voice filled with emotion. And I promise from now on, I'm going to be as dedicated to you as you've always been to me. Daniel pulled his daughter close, kissing the top of her head. I love you too, Hope, he whispered. More than you could ever know. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, both feeling the strength of their bond. Finally, Daniel gently guided Hope to the living room couch, where they sat side by side. You know, Daniel said softly, there's something I need you to understand. Yes, I've worked hard to give you a good life. But Hope, you saved me more than I ever saved you. Hope looked at him quizzically. What do you mean? Daniel took a deep breath, then told Hope about Aisha and the baby they had lost. He spoke of the dark days that followed, how he had felt lost and without purpose. When I found you that night, Daniel explained, his voice thick with emotion. It was like the world suddenly had color again. You gave me a reason to keep going, to be better. Every sacrifice, every late night, every extra shift, it was all worth it because it meant I got to be your dad. Hope listened in awe, her heart swelling with love for the man who had given her everything. Dad, she said softly, I think we saved each other. Daniel smiled, pulling her close. I think you're right, kiddo. As they sat together, both knew that their bond was unbreakable. They had weathered storms and celebrated joys, and through it all, their love had only grown stronger. The story of Daniel and Hope is more than just a tale of one man and the daughter he chose. It's a testament to the power of love, the strength of the human spirit, and the beautiful, unexpected ways that broken hearts can be healed. So, let Daniel and Hope's journey be more than just a heartwarming tale. Let it be the spark that ignites a flame of compassion and action in your own life. For in the end, it's not just about one man and the daughter he chose. It's about all of us, and the choices we make every day to love, to nurture, and to create families in all their beautiful, diverse forms. As you go forward, carry with you the knowledge that love has the power to heal, to transform, and to create miracles. And remember, somewhere out there, there might be a child like Hope, waiting for someone like you to change their world. The story doesn't end here. In many ways, it's just beginning. And you, dear reader, have the power to write the next chapter, not just in your own life, but in the lives of those who need it most. So, what will your story be? How will you spread hope, create family, and change a life? The choice and the adventure is yours. And like Daniel on that cold night so many years ago, you might just find that in reaching out to help another, you end up saving yourself. Thank you for watching. And if you believe in never giving up on those you love, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like Daniel's and Hope's. We can't wait to share more moments of courage and hope with you.